So for my first book talk, I chose to read the book Monster by Walter Dean Myers. So first of all, some background information about Walter Dean Myers. He was born in West Virginia in 1937, and he spent most of his adult life in Harlem. So this clearly influenced him in his writing because Monster is set in Harlem. And he was raised by his foster parents and suffered a speech impediment, so he started using writing, like writing fiction or writing poetry, as his form of communication, which I found really interesting. And the turning point in his career came when he won an award for his book titled Where Does a Boy Go? And he's actually supported his wife and 4 children ever since that book won this award. And I found a quote online about Myers' feelings about the young adult novel, which I found really relevant to our class. So it says, the special place of the young adult novel should be in its ability to address the needs of the reader, to understand his or her relationships with the world, with each other, and with adults. The young adult novel often allows readers to directly identify with the protagonist with similar interests and development. So I think this is a really good quote and a really true quote, because there's some young adult novel out there that everyone can relate to. So whether it's Monster or whether it's like Eleanor and Park or another young adult novel, someone will be able to relate to that book. So for Monster, it was published in 1999, and it's written in the form of a movie script in journals of the main character, Steve Harmon. So Steve Harmon is writing the movie script based on the fact that he is currently on trial for murder. So I can show you an example of what the movie script looks like in the book. You can see it. So it has like all the different actors, or I guess people's names in there, and then also has different movie script cues like close up or long shot or something like that, or cut to. So it's a really interesting form of writing that Walter Dean Myers chose. And so part of the book is written exactly like a script with different cues, like close-up of a narrator's face or a long shot of a person. And then part of it is Steve Harmon's experiences in jail written in the form of a journal. So I can show you an example of the journal too. So for this particular one, he wrote it on Sunday, July 12th, and then he just documents what happened in jail that day or something like that. So it also gives the book a personal touch too. So there's also various flashbacks in the book to Steve Harmon's life before being in jail, and which I found really interesting too, because it shows what Steve Harmon's life was like before he was convicted of murder. So the main characters of the book include Steve Harmon, Sandra Petrocelli, who is the prosecutor, Kathy O'Brien, who is Steve Harmon's defense attorney, James King, who is also on trial for murder, and Asa Briggs, who is King's defense attorney. And there's also various witnesses, the jury, the judge, and Steve Harmon's mother and father who appear at times throughout the book. So the basics of the trial are that 2 men by the names of James King and Bobo Evans robbed the local drugstore. While in the process of robbing the place, the drugstore owner was shot and killed. And it eventually gets back to the 2 men that they committed the crime, and then 16-year-old Steve Harmon, who is the main character, is convicted as being the lookout for the robbery, and therefore is also on trial for murder. So he's not being convicted for actually killing the man, but for being the lookout, which makes him guilty of murder also. And there's also obviously a lot of minor but important details and witnesses within the book, since it's a court case. I can't really go into many of these details without giving away the ending and whether or not it is determined if Steve Harmon is innocent or not. And I think one of the most powerful parts of the book is just the simple fact that Steve Harmon is 16 years old and he's on trial for murder, which, I mean, he has his whole life ahead of him, but he has to deal with this murder trial as a 16-year-old. So just imagine being in his shoes, being in high school, and then being pulled out of high school for this trial, which I think would be insane and crazy. But the case in the book is really only one of the main aspects. Another aspect is Steve Harmon's internal struggle with his identity, and he often refers to himself as a monster, hence the name of the book. And oftentimes he asks himself if he is like the people in the jail or if he's someone different and actually innocent. So one of the most important parts of the trial is Steve Harmon distancing himself from James King and Bobo Evans, who have committed multiple different crimes. Steve Harmon has never committed a crime before, but he's still on trial for murder, and he wants to portray himself as different to the jury from James King and Bobo Evans. And there's also Steve Harmon's mother and father struggling with the fact that their son is in jail. So obviously it's a multi-layered book that can spark a lot of discussion within a classroom setting, which I think is great. And for the age range, I would probably say 8th grade and up, simply because there's a lot of details in the book that have to be paid attention to, or the trial simply won't make sense. It's a book that you can read fast because it's written in the form of a movie script / trial, but you also have to read it kind of slow and make sure you take note of all the details. And if I would teach this book, I would suggest the students write down all the names and a short description of each character presented in their role in the trial, just so that they can keep track of everything. And then also, if I would teach this book, I would probably pair it with a classic novel of the trial, like To Kill a Mockingbird, and then compare the two trials and how a modern-day trial differs from a book like To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, obviously, this book was written 15 years ago, but there's probably going to be some differences between a trial in To Kill a Mockingbird and a trial that happened in 1999. And then you can even act out the trial in class, which I think would be a really interesting way to engage students in the book. And then I also really like how there are pictures in the book and different forms of text. So for example, the journal looks like someone's handwriting, while the movie script is less personal and just looks like writing on a page. So you could talk to the students about the movie script and how that's more impersonal than the writing that looks like someone's actual handwriting. And then this also makes it more visually appealing to the students. And you could also analyze the different forms of text and pictures within the book, along with the typical literary elements like symbols or external and internal conflict, which Steve Harmon experiences a ton of external and internal conflict. And then as far as censorship goes, I mean, there's some language in the book and violence within the jail. However, it's also an accurate portrayal of what jail is like. It's not a happy place, and I think Myers portrays it accurately without being too explicit with the violence and the language. I mean, overall, I would recommend this book to anyone just because it is really engaging with the trial. I mean, it's something different that obviously not a lot of books are written in the form of a movie script / trial. So I think it makes it more engaging than just a simple novel that's written in chapter